Hello there, welcome to CSS classes on frames and divs, right? So today we'll be diving into some web development concepts that will help you as a designer to think better when you're creating your designs, right? After all, we all desire that at the end of the day, whatever we have spent our valuable time in creating, we should be able to translate correctly into code, right? So there are circumstances where you see a developer has created something and is like a second version of what a designer has created. And some of this problem is because of the misunderstanding or miscommunication of how some elements work, right? So the purpose of this class is to help you understand some basic concepts of web development that influences how developers translate your design, and also influences how you are going to create future designs, right? So at the end of this lesson, you will understand what CSS classes is, and you will see how it's also used inside of your Figma or your Sketch or whatever design software you use, and to help you to begin to think on how to reorganize your layers, how to rename your layers, how to communicate your layers to your developer. That way, you'll be glad that the developer has recreated what you've done on your Figma file, right? So let's get started, right? So the web is made up of three core fundamentals, right? So we have the HTML, we have the CSS, we have the JavaScript. Of course, there are a lot of technology out there that web developers use to create web applications or websites, right? But on the basic fundamental level, these are the three core languages or structure that is being used, right? Of course, HTML and CSS are more or less not regarded as a programming language. Instead, they are regarded as a markup language because they are used to create the structure and the style of the websites. And of course, JavaScript and other high-level programming languages is what is used to create the functionality of a website, right? But for the purpose of this class, we're looking at HTML and CSS. So HTML, the hypertext markup language, is like the core structure of every website, right? So as designers, we create wireframes. So wireframe is like the skeleton of a product, a UI that you want to create. So HTML is more or less like a wireframe that houses the structure, the foundation of a web page, right? While CSS is like the visual aesthetic that is being added as a makeup on top of the HTML to give it style, to give it beauty, to give it brand, right? And also to help reorganize it so that it will look more visual appealing, right? So to illustrate that, let's take a look at an example. For every web page, you start with an empty page, right? An empty frame, just like when you're starting your design on Figma, right? So, but the first step is to create the structure, right? Which is the HTML. So in this case, if we turn on the HTML, you see that we have a stack of images, we have a stack of text and text and text. You really don't know what each of them presents, right? And you can't really tell what this web page is all about, right? Because it has no organization. It just they just show you the foundational skeleton of how things has been organized. Now, CSS is going to take this structure that has been created and begin to give it guidelines, styles, right? Things like padding, colors, spacing, the way we create it on our Figma file, right? So that is what CSS is going to do. So whenever you're adding a padding or a color to an element on Figma, you are more or less creating CSS styles, right? Because that is what the developer is going to use to replicate the same thing you have done on your Figma file, right? So if we turn on our CSS, you see that the structure of the page has changed, or not the structure anyway, but the visual structure. Yes, the visual organization of the page has changed, and now you can easily guess, oh, I think this is a welcome screen, right? So you say, oh, open for open mind. You see stacks of images. Then now you see that, oh, there's actually a button that tells you get started, right? Because the CSS has added styles, colors, spacing, padding, margin, and all of those stuffs. And now you can easily see the structure that the HTML has created and understand what the web page is all about. So this is how these two elements, these two system works. However, the communication between the HTML and the CSS is powered by CSS classes, right? So the CSS classes is what tells the HTML that this CSS style that has been created is to be applied to this particular frame or container, right? So let me show you an example. So here we have the same UI but now in code, right? This is just plain HTML and CSS, no serious programming stuff, right? There's no function, this button does not work. But if you look at this, we see we have the HTML here that has the structure of the website. Now it has different divs, and these are similar to frames. So frame is the design translation of HTML divs, right? So every box on a web page is a div, right? So now you see that here we have this card or this UI, this web page, and this web page is what starts here. If you look at what is going on here, you see that we have what is called UI card CSS. Now this UI card CSS is this entire web page, this entire card here, right? Now the beauty of this is that you won't see any color here, you will see any padding here or whatever. However, what you see that you see a class and you see the class name, right? Now this class name is what is used to create the styles on the CSS document. So in this case here, we have this same class name here. Now inside this CSS document, this is where the developer will begin to add the height, the width, the padding for that particular card or web page, right? So this is what influences how this card will look like. So if we mistakenly deactivate it, you will see that it affects the way the card looks like. So you see that the card has been disorganized because the CSS style has been deactivated. So that means that this particular web page is not feeding these styles to this HTML container here, right? Or this div block here. So that is why you see that it is not sending any information to it, and that is why the page looks disorganized, right? So but if you bring it back and check the page, you see that everything now goes back to normal. So this is how the CSS is influencing the look of the HTML structure by referencing the class that has been applied to the HTML structure. Now, why is this important for you as a designer, right? So number one is that sometimes you might be creating something like maybe a dashboard where you have a one card here, one UI card here that is a master component and it's referencing, and you have like maybe 10 or 20 other cards on the actual screen that is referencing the style of this card, right? So when the developer is creating this particular page, he or she don't need to create this card individually again. What he needs to do is just to create one, which is the master component. So once you create the CSS for this particular card here, now it is not easy to replicate that card in all the places that it needs to be on the web page, right? Now the good thing is that just like in your Figma file, if the developer decides to change the background color of this master card, the CSS background color of this card, it influences everything here. Now, that is important because when you're designing a component, you see, if you decide to change anything inside this variance of this master component, you have changed the CSS style of that particular variant. And if it's important that you change it, then you have to communicate to the person that is going to develop it that this particular card, there's a difference between this card and every other card on the screen, right? So if I go to this particular UI, and decide that I want to change the background color of this particular variant of this, what this means is that the CSS style of this particular card is different from the entire CSS style of this one. So what that means is that the developer will have to add an extra styling to this particular card to show this difference, right? But if the entire card were to be the same styles, right? If they were to be the same styles, if the developer changes the style of the CSS, it changes everywhere that card is being used. Why is that important? Because if you look at the naming here, you see that the master component is called investor's card. So as an example, maybe the developer uses the same name as the CSS style name, right? As a CSS class name. So what that means is that the developer is applying the style to the investor's card CSS style or CSS class, and automatically any other card that has the same style or class applied to it on the code will automatically inherit the style that is being changed on that CSS class, right? So now you see, if you were to create these cards, you now begin to think about that implication, because you don't want the developer you don't want each of your cards to have different names, right? Because they all inherit the same styles from the master component. That is why you have the same name applied to all of them, right? So now this is one instance. Another instance that I've seen is that if you understand how CSS classes work, you begin to think about how to rename your layers. Now you have to organize your layers. You see that this particular master card component here, look at the naming convention here. So you have one card, which is the investor's card, that is going to be used on a dashboard for the investor's website, right? And inside that card, you have the investor profile, you have the investor category, you have the icon, right? Now, of course, inside each of these categories, you have sub elements organized into different frames, right? So now this is how similarly the developer is going to structure the classes when they are creating that card, right? Now, another instance that I have seen is that when a developer is creating a particular component, they might be referencing your naming convention, and developers are trained in a way that when they are creating their classes or functions and all of that stuff, they name it in a way that when someone look at it, they will understand, okay, this is a CSS class. Now, if you had your class, your frames named frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, there is no way to actually tell the person looking at the design that, oh, this particular frame 1 is the investor card UI, right? Now, the same thing applies if the developer decides to create this particular component. If you go to dev mode, you will see that this particular component is named investor's card. And if a developer is using Figma to get the information, they'll just have to click on this name and automatically copies it. And then they don't have to think 2 times, what name should I give to this card, right? Because you as a designer have done the heavy lifting for them. So it reduces that complexity of thinking about naming convention. But of course, you wouldn't know what to name it or what to call it if you don't even know that is important, right? So this is one of the reasons why you see a lot of designers recommend that you name your layers. It's not because it's fancy, but because of the implications it has when developers are creating it, right? So this is one or two reasons why it's important as a developer as a designer, of course, to think about CSS classes and think about your naming convention. And I believe that when you start reorganizing your design to fit in the way developers work, it becomes easy to communicate your ideas, communicate your solutions to them. And of course, it becomes also very easy for them to translate that design into code, and you will see it the way you have designed it. And that is the most exciting thing for any designer out there, right? So I believe that this has been helpful. If you have any question, if you have any concern, please leave a comment on the comment section of this video, or preferably you can go to my website and send me a feedback request, or subscribe and share this video with your colleagues and your friends. And I look forward to future videos where I will share other insights with you. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.